Hi, I'm Ernie Conover. Thanks for visiting my shop again. In this final episode of building a shaker-style candle box, I'd like to talk about some things you can do if you don't have any power tools at all, especially a table saw. In the previous episodes of this series, we've assumed that everybody had a table saw to cut the pieces to the exact sizes needed for the project. And that's generally the outside dimensions of the box plus about a 1/16 so that you can hang the dovetails out and plane them down flush with the surface after the glue dries. What do you do if you don't have planers and table saws, machinery to do this with? There's a large contingent of people today that are actually working without power tools. That can be because they're off the grid, because they just enjoy using hand tools and really don't want to use power tools. And finally, it can be because they're a little afraid of power tools, or they're in a line of work where they were injured that it would be the end of their career. So there's some good reasons to use hand tools only. In this series, I've shown you the planes that you can use to level up and dimension the wood. We've used a 5.5 smoothing plane quite a bit, but you would also use a jack plane now and then, which is a little bit longer. Jack planes will make a surface level enough for most purposes. It will make a table leg straight, the apron of a table straight. It is generally the plane we first turn to when we're smoothing something up. The smoothing planes are numbers 4 and smaller. Jack planes are 5 and 5.5. This is a 4.5 Veritas. That's a number 5 Veritas, but it's a low angle plane, so-called, because it's bevel up. It has about 4 degrees steeper pitch in the cut than this plane does. If you were going to glue up panels, you would need to make edges very straight, and then you would need a very long plane called a joiner plane. We'll leave that out of this discussion for the time being. Those two planes can do all the smoothing, cleanup, dimensioning of lumber you need in hand tool joinery situations if you have wood that is surfaced 2 or 3 sides to start with. That is, that it comes to you a common thickness and one edge straight. It's easy to buy lumber that way today. So what do you do if you just have a rough sawn board like this and you want to smooth it up and you don't have a surface planer? Well, up till early 1800s, that's what everybody did. In fact, the apprentice's job was mostly to level up rough lumber so that the better guys could make stuff out of it. The plane you need to start this process is called a roughing plane, and it has a very high amount of curvature in the iron. It has a very open throat, doesn't really have a cap iron. So the first thing we're going to do is bring this surface level, and if we put a straight edge across here, you can see there's quite a bit of waviness in this piece of wood that I actually bandsawed out of the middle of a log making bowl blank about a year ago. So it's nice and dry by this point. It's been sitting inside. So we're going to start with this roughing out plane, but we're not going to go with the grain to start with. We're going to shoot across the grain and bring this thing level that way. And before I do that, I'm going to put a chamfer in the far edge so I don't break out too bad as I come off of there. And you can see immediately how I'm only hitting the high spots here. And I'm going to now come over here and take a slightly different path. Still have quite a bit of hollow here, quite a bit of hollow here. Keeping your paraffin handy is always a good idea. So we would now go to the smoothing plane, or we could go to the jack plane. It doesn't matter. Probably most workers would go to a jack at this point. And we're going to take a pretty aggressive cut here. Now that we've got this reasonably straightened out, if we put a ruler on there, we can see it's sitting flat on the piece. And if we sight down those two rulers, we can see that they're parallel to each other. We don't have any twist in the board. I actually, in my box over there, have two very long strips of wood, straight edges, that I use for this in demonstrations. Very nice. There, I took some final passes with a well set up smoothing plane there. I have this nice and smooth, level. And this becomes what you call the true face. We're going to take all measurements from here on out off of this face for reasons that I'll explain in a minute. And we're going to make one edge square to this face. So I'm going to make a true face mark running to the true edge. And I would now set that in the vise so that I can shoot this edge and bring that square with the face. We have this shot straight now, and I'm going to take a square and see if I am square to the face, which I am not. I am low here. You can see light under the square. So this side is higher than this side, and this has to be planed down a little like that. It's like this now. It needs to come like that. Now, the beginner is tempted to try to just tip this up and shoot across here, and you'll never, ever make it straight that way. What you want to do is take and use the regulator, and what we're going to do is pull the regulator towards the low side so that we take a heavier chip on the right side and a lighter chip on the left. One or two more passes of the plane will bring it level. There we are. It's nice and square. We have a true face, and now we have a true edge, and we're going to make a little crow's foot there like that. This mark points to the true face. The true face runs to the true edge. You can always find the other if you lose it. Now, it is imperative in hand tool joinery, when you're working wood up at the bench by hand, that we always take measurements from these two surfaces. Now, to work this piece up to an even thickness, we're going to strike a gauge line. Once we find the lowest corner, we can set our gauge near that line, and we'll strike gauge lines. We set this down and we get out our scrub plane again and plane that off until we're right almost at the gauge line. We would then go to one of our two jack planes here and bring it level, finalize it with a smooth plane, and bingo, we've got a piece of wood to work with. Yeah, it's a lot of rigmarole, but on the other hand, you don't need a gym membership when you do this. There are times when this skill can come in handy. Many years ago, I built that toolbox, and I had that nice wide walnut board there. I didn't have a thickness planer that was that wide, so I did it by hand. It worked fine. What do you do if you don't have a table saw and you want to cut all your parts? You've maybe had somebody cut the pieces to the right thickness and width for you, but you need to cut them up into usable pieces. And our candle box had a front and back that was 11 7/8. And this board has been cut with a table saw. And we're going to start by putting a true face mark to the edge that you can see, and we're going to put a true edge mark there. And if you put a square on that edge, this end is dead square. So I'm going to leave that one be, and I'm going to line this ruler up square with that edge. And if we come out here to 11 7/8 and we put a mark, we can then take our square and placing the body of the square, I'm going to put my scriber down there and I'm going to draw a scriber line right across there. If it's a thicker piece of wood, it's often wise to come over here on this edge that you can see when you're sawing and draw a line down here so that you can see that you're sawing straight. I'm now going to take a back saw. This is a 14-point crosscut saw. And my line is right there. I'll put some chalk in it so maybe you can see it a little better. There, that should make it much more visible to you. I'm now going to actually just cut a little proud of that line. Not going to split it. There, we did a nice job of cutting that off. We're proud of it. Now, in the method of dovetailing I showed you, that where we have machine cut parts, we set this for a little more than the thickness of the material, and we simply scratch a gauge line that we lay out to. We're going to have to do it a little differently now. We're going to take a set of dividers, and we're going to set those for then the thickness of the material, like that. We're going to go to the gauge line and just put a little tick mark there. And now going off the true edge, I'll scribe my gauge line. And going off the true face, I'll still going off the true edge, mark the back. And my lines meet up nicely. I now lay this out just like I did before. Cut my dovetails. I've got a little more waste actually now. And once I plane this off, it'll come up the exact distance from that edge that I'd planned on. And I've got away with doing this without having to own a table saw, able to saw it with an ordinary back saw. Now you can get back saws, they're available again today. Veritas makes very nice ones. Lee Nielsen makes very nice ones. There's a bunch of other people around making good back saws today. This is a 14-point crosscut, mostly for dovetails you want to rip filing. But I found when you get to about 14 teeth per inch, even 12, it doesn't make much difference which way you file it. You can crosscut or rip with either one about the same at those fine teeth settings. As you get coarser, it starts to make a big difference whether you've got a crosscut saw or a rip saw. If you only have a rip saw, give this a try, and you won't, if it's long as it's 14 or even 12 points or finer, you'll be fine. You'll just cut this as slick as can be. Let's now look at using planes to square this end up. If we want it to look like it came out of a table saw, there's a way we can do that with hand tools, and that's called shooting boards or shooting boxes. They're both terms for this particular tool, which traditionally is shop made. This is a plain or simple shooting board or shooting box. I made 3 such devices years ago as a sort of self-imposed term paper. I've included the plans for the versions that I made on our website under the online instruction tab. You can download these PDFs and build these yourself if you wish. There's lots of plans around on the internet for shooting boards, and Veritas makes a very good commercial one, and they also sell the parts to make it yourself. This shooting board will make the end of a piece dead square. If we take our piece that we cut proud of the gauge line right here and we put the true edge against this stop and bring it out so that it's just overhanging this edge, we can take a simple jack plane, and most planes are made such that the cheeks or sides of the plane are dead square to the sole, so that when you lay it on the cheek, it makes the sole dead vertical. And we can now just slide that along like that, and very quickly we'll be able to bring this right up to our gauge line. It is square in this direction, and it's also square in this direction. In the late 19th century, Stanley brought out a plane called the number 51. They also brought out a very elegant shooting box called the number 52. It is very rare today and brings $1,500 to $2,000 in very good condition. This is Veritas's version of the 51, which I think is even better than the original Stanley. Lee Nielsen also makes a very nice exact copy of the number 51. But it's a little different from most planes in that the blade is on this face and this face is meant to run on the shooting box. So you simply set it down. The handle is adjustable to any angle that's convenient for you. And you could now take this piece of wood to cut the other half of our box here. We'd put our true edge against here and come in with our and there we've shot the end nice and square. As you can see, it's beautifully square, and it's also square in this direction. So we now could measure off 7 7/8, cut proud of the line with either a shop-made miter box or the simple bench hook method I showed you previously. I'll show you the shop-made miter box next. And then we could plane off to that line with this shooting plane, and we'd have stock that was no different than came out of a table saw. This is a donkey's ear chute because it looks like a donkey's ear hanging down off the bench. And it is a unique piece of hardware that is actually really handy at times. If you have thin stock that you want to make miter joints on, such as the liner to a box of any kind, you can simply put this down on this miter chute like this. And of course you rough cut this with some kind of a miter box or even a table saw. But I can now just come right in here and bring this right up perfect. I've got a sharp edge here, and if I put a square on this, it's a perfect 45 degrees. It's invaluable because you can take a box like this and make a set of liners for it that will go in as a perfect tight slide fit. On most of the boxes I make, I simply put these in. I don't put any glue or anything else. They just stay there for the rest of their lives. To make miters and crosscuts that are a little more precise than the method I showed you earlier in this video with a simple bench hook is to make a simple miter box. This one is for small stock. It's often good to make a bigger one that you use with a bigger back saw, sometimes called a carcass saw, that's wider and you can lay pieces like this down flat in them. This one is for trim molding work. And we have 45s and we have a 90-degree crosscut. So I can simply lay these pieces down in this. I have them marked out here. I've already cut this end, and now I'll cut this end. Simply set it down in there. And I laid this all out with tools when I made this miter box, and then carefully cut all of these places. And then we're just proud of our line on each end. And I'll show you now how we can bring that right into the exact length with a shooting box. Our third shooting board is a miter chute. And this is great for any kind of mitered situation, such as a picture frame, miter around a top of a coffee table, whatever. And I previously showed you in the last clip how we laid out this and cut it with a simple shop-made miter box. We can now put these pieces in here, take our shooting plane, and there, we've dialed it right into our layout line. If we put our square on this, it is a dead 45 in that direction, and it is dead square across its width. This will make picture frames that look like the wood grew together that way, and is the best solution to get really good miters. Even if you do the primary cuts on a table saw with a good carbide blade, this will still dial everything into a perfect square and get everything fitting perfectly. And it allows you to adjust. You can cut everything just 1/64 oversized on each end and just dial it in perfect. Great piece of equipment, belongs in every shop. I hope you've enjoyed this little primer on things you can do to work without machine tools or to improve on your machine tools. Either way, it's your choice. I really appreciate your visiting my shop today. Thanks a lot.